Hi guys, Red Warlock here. This is going to be another deck guide video on the red-blue items list. And in this video I will talk about the green-steel matchup. So I decided to make a few more videos before the challenges and the store championships start to talk about the matchups. I already made a video on the red-purple matchup, and for now I want to focus on the maybe the second most played matchup match you'll get, depending on your meta and your region. Sometimes green steel is still the most played deck, sometimes red purple is, and maybe even red blue or blue steel. But those videos will come later, but this one will be about the green steel matchup. So I made like three categories on cards that are important, less important than normal, and have special rules in that you normally don't want to follow against a blind matchup or against like other decks. Um, so I will start to talk about. I will start with talking about the cards that are um, really good against the green steel matchup and deserve a little bit more of a thought process during the mulligan or during play itself, like inking decisions. So yeah, Sisu, for example, Big Sisu, I'll start with that one, is a really good card against green steel most of the time. It kills almost everything, and if it doesn't kill things like Shifted Robin Hood or Aladdin, one ice block will help with that. It is still an 8 cost, and 8 costs are very hard, so it can often be a good discard. However, if you have a 3 cost C2, for example, lying around, you might, even though it's an inkable, you might not want to discard it and keep the C2 in hand and hope you can shift it on turn 6. It can also immediately offer a good lore threat against the green steel deck, and it kills other Diablos and stuff like that. So Sisu is a really good card against their deck. It also can't be hit. It's a board wipe that can't be hit by Ursula, and it kills the Ursulas. So yeah, try to keep this in hand, but it's one of the cards. It's probably the card that you would discard the most out of these cards that are kind of like sacred or cards against the green steel match. So you have Brawl. Brawl's very important not to ink without good reason because it can deal with Diablo. A shifted Diablo, they draw a card for your turn, but if you can play this on a non-shifted Diablo, then it kills their Diablo without them having drawn a card. And if you have an ice block, it kills basically everything. So Brawl is a very good card in this matchup, and you should look out for not inking this card and keeping it in your definitely keeping it in your opening hand. Although that's something you basically do in every matchup. Brawl is such a good card in your deck that you just keep it in your opening hand almost every time. Um, for green steel, Workshop, and this goes for all discard decks to be honest. Workshop is one of the best cards. For green steel is a little bit worse because they have Aladdin, but if they don't, then Workshop can deal uh, very well with their discard threats because you can draw a lot of cards, especially with cards like Popsicle. Um, I would say that keeping this on turn 3 versus a card like the Queen, which can die from a Zeus, for example, on the draw, or um, or it will die immediately after and get threatened by Robin Hood and Robin Hood's shift. Workshop is more resilient to their threats, except for Aladdin, and that's a really big problem where you have to play around and you might want to kill their Aladdin first before you kill uh, things like Diablo. Sometimes you just need to, if you have double workshop, for example, you draw a shit ton of cards. Sometimes it doesn't really matter that they have Diablo because you have more ink and they just have so many cards in their hand that they can't really do anything with. Because the second you play like all your items and you have enough removal, you just kill their removal and then they kill your Medusas, for example. But who cares? You just continue playing Lucky Diamond and out of nowhere you just Tomato them from 0 to 20 immediately. That's how you can win these games. So Workshop is actually a really good, most of the time, pretty good cards to keep, especially if you have no other 3 cost card in your opening hand. So Workshop in this matchup for me is more of a keep than in most other matchups. but it really has grown on me in all other matches as well. So sometimes it's just a keep if you have no 3 cost card in your hand anyways. So then now we're talking about like the 4 best cards in our deck against green steel. One of them is Scuttle, which is kind of surprising, but you have to think about it as a 2 drop that the characters can kind of threaten them, especially if you have cards like Shield or Vitalosphere. But it's basically just a 2 drop that draws a card, and you want as many cards in your hand as possible every single time against green steel. And a 2-turn Scuttle is much better than a turn to LeFou, because this also sticks around, for example, and it can most of the time, about 85% of the time, draw you a card. So Scuttle is really good. Um, then we go to Flavor Sham. So Flavor Sham is basically the holy grail. You need Flavor Sham, and you should not ink it under almost any circumstance unless you have like 3 in your hand. Even if you have 2 in your hand, you might not want to ink it. You might want to ink something else so you can start drawing cards. Remember that there are some play patterns in this deck against green steel where you can draw cards with Hiram even if they have a Diablo out and them not drawing cards. For example, Shield or LeFou can ready the Diablo so they don't draw, so it doesn't draw cards after your draw step, and that's really important to note when you can quest with Hiram. Most of the time, I would say your cards that you draw are better than their cards they draw, but that's not always the case. Let's say you have 6 cards in hand, they have 2, then you might want to stop drawing for a second. You can keep it untapped, you can quest for it and not pop an item. Sometimes you need your items to like set up a win if you have Tomato and Dime, for example, but most of the time Hiram helps you win the game, and you might mulligan a little bit more cards to try to get Hiram in your game, especially on the draw against green steel. Same goes for like Popsicle. Popsicle is a really good card in this matchup because it's a card you play that also draws a card, and it has a really good synergy with a Workshop and Hiram. Um, I would keep most pretty much all Popsicle, maybe 3 max, maybe the fourth um, I would throw out onto the mulligan. Unless I have a workshop, then I can just keep them, right? Or you can keep them as ink. But Popsicle's a really good card. The banish to remove 2 damage is not often used, but it could. After they storm something to draw a card, right? Sometimes they do that. That's the deck that does that the most, I would say, from all the steel decks that run that card, even from set 3, because sometimes they just need to draw that card to try to have you discard another card, and then Popsicle can help heal your character, so it's basically for nothing. And then it also synergizes well with the best, maybe even the best card, better than Hiram in this matchup, which is Maurice. If you have a hand with a lot of items, you basically win the game as soon as you untap with Maurice, because you just draw a lot of cards and you play a lot of items, and then you're so close to your win condition already. Let's say you have a lucky dime in your hand, you can quest, you can play the lucky dime for 5, and then you have 2 or maybe even 3 more ink to just play items and draw cards. And then if it dies, sure it dies, but Maurice most often survives 1 or even 2 turns after questing. So Maurice is really good. I would try to keep it in my hand, but sometimes you just have to ink it. It's okay. Uh, Hiram is most of the time more important, but it kind of depends on your hand. But Maurice can do a lot of work, and this is really one of those matchups where uh, playing Maurice is better over playing the dragon. All right, now I'm gonna talk about 3 cards that you more rarely play than in normal games against non-green steel decks. The Queen is kind of like, sure, it's a pretty good uh, turn three play. However, if they have a Robin Hood lying on turn 1 or on turn 2, then it becomes a lot more dangerous because it's such a free kill for them if they can kill it with their Robin Hood, right? Because we don't have Smash or something. So it's a little bit dangerous. Sometimes you might want to keep it untapped instead of tapped if they have Roman Hood lying around with, let's say, if you have a shield, you might want to only activate it once. That kind of depends on your hand, and if you really need to draw cards, then you might just activate it and just sacrifice it, right? But yeah, it's I would say I would rather sometimes most of the time I'd rather play a workshop than a queen on turn 3, even though against other decks you might want to play the queen first and keep the workshop for turn 4. It kind of depends on your hand, especially if you have workshop plus Hiram and you had a turn 1 popsicle or something. Then you might not just have you might not have the time to play the queen, and you can play the workshop on turn 3 and then draw cards from the workshop on turn 5 after you've played Hiram on turn 4. Maui is quite bad in this matchup, to be honest. It kills their cove, which is the most important part. But if they don't have a cove or they don't even play it, then it doesn't really do anything. It can kill the Robin Hoods and obviously all the cards they quest with, but it's a rather slow answer, and you want to like most of your focus in this matchup is drawing cards and having cards in your hand, keep them in your hand, and that's something that yeah that uh, is not very Maui doesn't very help with that, and as soon as you can stabilize by playing other cards like Be Prepared or the Big Sisu, then Maui becomes a lot worse. So yeah, Maui is just most of the time ink, and that's true in a lot of matchups, and basically all matchups except for red purple or aggro decks. But against green steel especially, most of the time just keep it for ink. And Fishbone Quill is very dangerous against green steel. I would keep it basically only in your hand for ink, or if you have a heavy hand that relies on workshop, so you can draw a lot of cards. But it's a poison chalice. Let's say it's a poison chalice because you want to keep a lot of cards in your hand, and if whenever you play a Fishbone Quill, you're kind of like mentally thinking about, okay, I need to ink twice this turn. I need to ink again this turn, and against green steel, you don't really need to do that. You don't need to ramp. You need to have cards in your hand so that you can discard the quote unquote bad cards to keep your cards that draw cards in your hand. And Fishbone Quill just empties your hand immediately, and then you have no cards in it, and you need to rely on your top deck. Well, if you just inked the Fishbone Quill and played the Workshop on turn 3 or played the Queen on turn 3, you might get more value out of those turn 3 plays than the actual Fishbone Quill. You might ink twice with it, uh, go like ramp up 2 turns and then not ink for 4 turns because you had no cards in hand. So watch out for the Fishbone Quill. You can keep it in your hand as ink if your hand is pretty good. Otherwise, you can mill it away, and just make sure that you don't ink too much when you actually have the Fishbone Quill in play, unless you have like 3 workshops laying around or something, and you play the Fishbone Quill, you draw 3 cards, and then you ink something with Fishbone Quill. Sure, at that point, you're probably already winning, right? But at that point, the Fishbone Quill helps a lot. But for now, like in most games, be very careful with the Fishbone Quill. And then I'm going to talk about the other 5 cards that are like have special rules, right, or play styles that aren't really in effect against other decks. This is especially true for Sisu plus Ice Block. So if you have a hand with enough inkables, I would say maybe all other cards should be inkable, or maybe one other can be uninkable, depends on what cards is. Like let's say a big Sisu, then you might keep both, and then you could maybe discard a shift Sisu, or you could play the shift on turn 6. Is that Ice Block plus Sisu kills a lot of things in their deck, and especially the Diablos if they don't have Hidden Cove. So if you have both, you can keep both. If you have only one of the two, you probably mulligan them. Especially if you have a brawl in hand, then Sisu is not really that useful unless you have an ice block, because their one cost things are not their one attack things are not something you really want to kill in this matchup. But the 2 attack things are the things you want to kill instantly, right? They're Diablo. So if ice block turn 1 ice block, turn 2 do nothing, turn 3 Sisu there, Diablo is something that's very strong. So keep this. If you have both together, if you have only one, then mulligan them away and hopefully draw inkables, so you have a good hand that draws cards and where you can keep your cards in hand and not have to discard your inkables or inkables and do nothing, right? So Yeah, that's like a special kind of rule. Another rule is for the dime and the tamatoa. So um, discarding dime is probably the best thing you could do in this matchup. Like if you have a dime in hand and they say discard one card, okay, I discard dime. It's basically free. Most of the time, unless you have like workshops, it doesn't really matter if it's in this matchup, if the dime would be on your hand or in the discard, because you can just get it back with Tamatoa. So whenever you have a dime in hand and you have to discard a card, almost always just discard a dime unless you need it for like lethal next turn or something. If you have a dime laying around and you can play dime and activate both dimes and win the game. Like those are the like almost the only uh, exceptions to not just discarding the dime. Like the dime is so good of a discard target that's basically not getting a card from your hand because you're never inking it with Fishbone Quill. It's an inkable, and if you want to play it, you can just get it back with Tamatoa anyway. So dime is such a good discard card in your hand that you don't really mind drawing it. Sometimes against green steel, it's like, okay, now I don't need to think. I don't have the opportunity to make a mistake discarding a card I didn't want to discard because I can just discard the dime. Uh, so Tamatoa is a little bit interesting. Against some decks, you really do not want to ink Tamatoa. I have learned after playing a while that inking Tamatoa on like turn one or turn two can be okay, even against decks like red blue or blue steel, um, especially blue steel wheel, where sometimes you can expect them to wheel you anyway, so you never get to that Tamatoa. So it's better to be in the ink than in the discard. Um, but in this matchup, you can ink it and hope to get the second or the third Tamatoa because the first Tamatoa is probably not going to do anything or it's going to get discarded. The chance that you get to 8 ink with having the Tamatoa in your hand plus more cards is low, and if you do, then you're probably winning anyways, and you have the time to wait for the second Tamatoa. So inking Tamatoa in this matchup is a-okay, it's fine, and although in the late game it does allow you to draw a lot of cards, especially if you have a Hiram or a Popsicle, you can just like chain drawing cards. But at this point, you're probably winning anyway, so you can wait a little bit for the second or third Tamatoa, even if you had to ink twice. Then the final card I want to talk about the Beaver Bird. So the thing with Beaver Bird is it's your only song and you play three. So if they play Ursula, Deceiver, most of the time they take nothing. However, if you think they have it and you have the Beefy Bird in hand and you have to discard first for another effect, you might just want to discard the Beefy Bird. Especially if you have cards like Sisu laying around that can basically do the same thing. And sometimes, if you have a fishbone quill laying around, like you have to play something you have nothing better to do, you can ink it with you can ink the beef bird with it, and allow their Ursulas to do literally nothing. Right, it's just a 1/3 after that, and uh, like basically get an ink, except and not having a discarded card that does nothing. Um, but like beef bird is pretty important in this matchup, and if I think that if you get like one Sisu or one Beef Bird off and wipe their board, you're basically won the game immediately, unless they're at like 18 ink or something, or 18 lore or something. Beef Bird is such a like game winner, especially when they have a low amount of cards in their hand, which happens almost all the time, except if they have a Diablo and you have nothing to kill it, and they draw a lot of they draw a lot of cards because you have a because you're high rammed or workshopped. All right, those are all the cards I wanted to talk about in this matchup. I'll make another video in an hour or something about the red blue and the blue steel matchups, and I hope those will also be helpful. I hope this video was helpful. If you have other questions or you have suggestions for other matchups you want videos about, except for the big four, let me know and I might try. I haven't played much against non-big four decks, but I can make a video on decks like green, yellow discard, which is basically kind of the same as this, but with a few different rules because they don't play steel. All right, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.